Hello, everyone. Welcome, and thank you for joining us for session 2 of our Array October event. We are devoting the month of October to all things array. We'll be focusing on multi-hydrophone deployments throughout the month, and we'll be sharing content all about arrays, how to build them, when and why to use them, as well as inviting different experts to join us for live sessions exploring acoustic arrays from around the world. We started Array October last week with an introduction to arrays from Mark Wood and Pierre Almeida. You can find this session on our YouTube channel and on our Facebook page. We will dive a little bit deeper into arrays with our guest experts from the Ocean Observatory Initiative, Dana, Mike, and Orest. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Good morning, everybody.
For those who are tuning in who may be unfamiliar with Ocean Sonics, we're an ocean acoustics company, and we're based in Truro, Nova Scotia on the east coast of Canada. We created the IC-Listen, and this is a real-time smart hydrophone. It's a tool that's used to collect ocean sound data, and what makes it special is that this hydrophone processes data at the source in real time, so you can actively listen and view data while the sensor is deployed. Our goal through the creation of the IC-Listen was to make ocean sound data more accessible. And accessibility happens through a number of ways, including the ease of use. Hydrophone arrays are notoriously difficult to design, assemble, and deploy, and they produce huge amounts of data. They require smart power budgeting and configuration. By using an IC-Listen for an acoustic array, many of these headaches are alleviated. These hydrophones self-synchronize and are relatively low power, and they also come with deployment tools, control hubs, specialized software, all to make array assembly, deployment, and data collection easier. So in keeping with the theme of Array October, it made perfect sense to Ocean Sonics to reach out to our partners at the Ocean Observatory Initiative. The Ocean Observatory Initiative, also known as OOI, is a science-driven ocean observing network that delivers real-time data from more than 800 instruments to address critical science questions regarding the world's oceans. OOI data is freely available to anybody who has an internet connection. So included within those 800 instruments are a number of IC-Listen smart hydrophones. So today, Dana, Mike, and Orest will be focusing on a specific deployment of these sensors, the OOI cabled regional array. So after our guests finish their presentation, we are going to have a live Q&A session. So if you want to know some more detail about what we covered today, just leave us a comment on our live stream, and we'll do our best to answer it live after the presentation. Now I'm going to invite Dana to share her screen and get us started on our exploration of the OOI array.
Great, thanks, Rose. Can everyone see that?
Yep, looks great.
Okay, great. So I'm Dana Manalang, and here with my colleagues Orest Kalka and Mike Harrington to share about the OOI regional cabled array. And so, as Rose mentioned, this is really a community resource, and we are part of the University of Washington implementing organization. So that means that we're responsible for the installation, operation, and maintenance of the array, and making sure that quality data is getting to end users and science users and the general public. We are not acousticians. We are engineers and scientists. And so I'm going to start by zooming way out and giving you an overview of what the array is, what the components are, and then Orest and Mike are going to dive a little bit deeper into some of the acoustic data that we've collected and the applications that some of the science users have for the acoustic data. So just to tell you a little bit more about the Ocean Observatories Initiative, it was funded in 2009 by the U.S. National Science Foundation. It's an integrated infrastructure for science-driven platforms and multidisciplinary sensors, and with a vision for examining processes, global ocean basin scale, and also regional and smaller scale processes. So this kind of multi-scale activity. And so you can see that the OOI itself is made up of multiple moorings and arrays over the Americas. And it delivers, it's all wrapped up within a cyber infrastructure that delivers free access to that data to anybody who has an internet connection. It is also designed as an expandable architecture, and so other people outside of the OOI community can develop instrumentation and come and operate it on the arrays. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the overall science themes that drove the creation of the arrays. And you see the Argentine Basin and Southern Ocean are grayed out down there. Those are not installed at this point in time. But we have some early data, again, kind of stemming back from 2014 when the arrays went online. So the overarching science themes are ocean atmosphere exchange, climate variability, ocean circulation, and ecosystems. And by the way, you're seeing circles come up, or those aren't quite rectangles, but you're seeing highlighted the different parts of the array that correspond to each of the science themes as we go through this. Turbulent mixing and biophysical interactions, coastal ocean dynamics and ecosystems, fluid rock interactions and sub-seafloor biosphere, and plate scale geodynamics. And so given that, I want to now zoom into the regional cabled array, which is what we are involved in. And so that's this little part off of the west coast of Oregon and Washington off the US. There's a small tectonic plate called the Juan de Fuca plate that's sandwiched in between the Pacific plate and the North American plate. And the real driver for the regional cabled array was to bring fiber optic and power to remote places in the ocean so that we could have ongoing continuous measurements and we'd be able to see them in real time over the internet. And so it's a real powerful tool to be able to start and get continuous monitoring and interactive monitoring at some of these locations, looking at things like volcanic activity, methane seeps, vent communities, water column processes, all across the plate. So taking a dive down, this is the cabled array, and you see it's a sister network to the Ocean Networks Canada array that's north and went online a little bit before, a couple of years before the regional cable array did. But I'm going to focus in on the RCA, the regional cable array. So you can see that the cables come off of Pacific City, Oregon. They're buried out to 1,500 meters water depth. And we've got two main cables, one, the northern line that runs out to the convergence zone between the Juan de Fuca plate and the Pacific plate, and the southern cable that actually comes out and wraps around and comes up the continental slope. And this is unique amongst the OOI infrastructure. It's the only cabled array of its type and the largest one, the largest scientific array like this in the world. You see some dotted lines there. Those are not installed parts of the arrays right now, but there are the potential for expansion. Overall, the array hosts 900 kilometers of electro-optical cable. And so I'm going to start zooming in and showing you what each of the components are that bring this power and bandwidth out to the ocean. So the primary, we call the primary infrastructure really this backbone cable. And there's 7 primary nodes. And you can see those listed here as the mid-plate node, 1A through 1D, and 3A and 3B. There's the two main cables, the one landing and a cable station in Pacific City, Oregon, as well as multiple scientific sites. And then you can see in the picture here, hanging off of the primary infrastructure is what we call the secondary infrastructure. So the secondary infrastructure is really what distributes the power and bandwidth that's coming through that backbone cable out to instrumentation and gets those instruments to the places where they need to make the measurements, whether that's on the seafloor or within the water column. So the primary infrastructure, this is what a primary node looks like on the seafloor. Again, there's 7 of them. They each bring in 10 gigabit per second Ethernet, 10 kilowatts of power. They distribute timing across the infrastructure. And again, the cable's buried when near shore. And you can see here that they're made to be ROV operable. So ROVs can come and maintain and operate the system. There's a interface piece that the ROV can actually remove and replace, and that's the part that interfaces with the scientific assemblies. So you see the ROV now is moving cables and connectors around. So again, hanging off of the primary infrastructure is the secondary infrastructure, and that's made up of systems that were designed and built at the University of Washington. So we've got what we call secondary nodes. These are 18 seafloor nodes that are connected with multiple extension, electro-optical, and some just electrical cables, all ROV installed. Vertical moorings. So I'll show you what our vertical moorings are. There's 3 of those installed in multiple water depths, as well as about 150 total instruments and 35 different unique types of instruments, of which hydrophones are only a small part. So again, it's really an interdisciplinary set of instruments designed to make measurements across scientific spectrums. So the secondary infrastructure really gives us a full water column impact. So we can operate at the seafloor. And so there you see an image of a seafloor junction box. We have those installed down to almost 3,000 meter water depth. And you can see here that they're made to connect together as well. The middle picture here, the middle frame, is what one of our mooring platforms looks like. And so that's actually has 2 mooring legs. So rather than the traditional single leg mooring, this has 2 mooring legs to keep it from rotating. And then you can see a winched shallow profiler. We call it a shallow profiler just because it's looking at the upper 200 meters of the water column. And then on the right-hand side here, you see what we're calling our deep, the wire crawling profiler that can actually go down to full ocean depth and then up to 150 meters. So we get that crossover and that full water column experience. So diving into the seafloor junction boxes, similar, again, this is our secondary infrastructure that takes all the power and bandwidth that's being delivered by the primary infrastructure and then breaks it out into what instruments can use. It's a modular design. They can be daisy chained and again, made for ROV maintenance. So there you see a seafloor junction box that's had a rough day, probably a run-in with some fishing equipment, but is still operating 100%. So here's a little video of what the shallow winched profilers look like and what the deployment operation looks like. So you can see that it's latched underneath the ROV for deployment. That gets taken down to the installed mooring platform. And then that bail, so it's like a bucket handle that gets lowered. And then that science pod, we call that the science pod on the winch profiler, moves up and down over 200 meters. So the mooring platform itself is at about 200 meters water depth. And that profiler will run up to just underneath the surface of the water. It doesn't break the surface, and it carries 10 scientific instruments on it with room for more. Most of those are chemical and optical sensors as well. On the mooring platforms, though, and Mike and Oris will talk to you a little more about this, we do have a broadband, an Ocean Sonics broadband hydrophone as well. So the shallow winched profilers, they do 9 profiles a day at each of the 3 installed sites. They are programmed to avoid hazardous surface conditions. So if there's large waves on the surface, they will turn around early to save themselves, and that's been working quite well. And also the missions that they run, the profiling up and down can be customized. For example, we have a stepped profile that allows the profilers to stop. There's some sensors, especially chemical sensors for pH and PCO2 that require a little more time to equilibrate. And by adding those steps in the profile, we're able to get more accurate readings from those. So moving on to the deep wire crawling profiler. This is a profiler that was modified from a commercial McLean profiler. So some of you may be familiar with that, and this image might look somewhat familiar, but it's got a few special features that were developed at University of Washington. One of them is inductive battery charging. So there's actually a dock that this comes and meets up with at the seabed and inductively charges and also uses an RF link to download cable. So it talks over Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi generally doesn't work the way it does in air underwater, although it will work over very short ranges. There's also a real-time low bandwidth inductive data link, so we can get feedback from the profiler as it's moving up and down the wire. And it's also made for ROV installation and removal. So that's a theme of all the systems that we built and maintain, is that an ROV has to be able to do that work. So all of this then comes together. It really is an underwater network and is managed on shore. So all of the systems, we can talk to them just like we were talking to them on a lab bench from shore. So every year we have a maintenance cruise to go out and pull instrumentation out that needs to be calibrated, replace anything that's not working. And so this is a typical loadout. This might be on the Thompson's, probably on the Thompson, the research vessel. And so you can see that we take about 4 cruise legs because of limited space on the deck. So we take about 4 loads of equipment out that look about like this each year. And so that takes about 30 to 40 days of ship time each summer. So I'd like to now zoom in on a couple of the science, some really interesting locations that we're monitoring with this system. I'm going to go pretty quick and then turn it over to Oris, because he'll go a little bit deeper into some of these locations. But Axial Seamount is the most active submarine volcano on the mid-ocean ridge on the west coast of the United States. It's erupted about 3 times in the last 10 years, and so we have quite a set of instrumentation at the caldera of that volcano. So at the base of the volcano, it's about 3,000 meter water depth, and then up at the caldera, it's about 1,500 meters. So it's about a mile tall volcano, and also about a mile below the surface of the water. So you can see some of the instrumentation there, a very heavily geophysical array. So we can see the inflation and deflation of that caldera through the eruption cycles. A second area is Hydrate Ridge. So that's at about 800 meters of water depth coming up the continental slope. And it's an area where full of gas hydrates. And so, again, we've got a geophysical array there, as well as some other kind of gas hydrates, some fluid samplers, and sometimes there's a mass spectrometer, not there right now. You can see from the picture here that there's significant bacterial mass on the seabed, as well as what I don't have is the plumes, but this is an area where we see a lot of bubble plumes as well. So with that, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Oris Kauka, who is going to tell us a little more about the acoustic elements of the array and some example data.
Thank you, Dana. Can everybody hear me all right? Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, all right. Thank you. All right. As Dana mentioned, she gave a really nice overview of the overall infrastructure for the regional cable array. I'm going to try to talk a little bit more about the what hydrophones we have on the system, where they are, and give 2 quick examples of people kind of studies that are using the hydrophone data. And then I'll follow that with just showing you where to get the data if you're interested. So there are currently on the system, and the instruments that are on the system we consider to be core instruments. These instruments are core instruments, so they are supposed to be on there for the full 25 years of the program, fully supported. There are 6 broadband hydrophones, and this is the Ocean Sonics IC Listen HF. They're currently sampling at 64 kilosamples per second, 24-bit A to D conversion. We are hoping to up that up to 256 kilosamples per second in the near future. In the next, we keep promising it, but probably won't be for another couple of months, which would then afford us the opportunity to make measurements on signals up to 120 kilohertz. There are 2 in the water column, and I'll show you where they are at 200 meters water depth. And there are 4 of those on the seafloor And those, the seafloor depths range from 80 meters to 2,900 meters water depth. There are 5 low-frequency hydrophones, and these are the high-tech incorporated HCI 90Us. These are all coupled with the broadband seismometers on the seafloor. These are sampled and via the seismometer circuitry, and these are sampled at 1 kilosample per second. They have a capability of going up to 4 kilosamples per second, and they're located there primarily to remove the waterborne signal from the seismic signal, and those are at water depths of 780 to 2,900 meters water depth. All the hydrophone and seismic data pass through a Navy switch, which then the Navy can divert the data either temporarily or permanently, depending on their needs or for security reasons. But I think in general, we have gotten back 90% of the data eventually. The hydrophone data, the HYDBB, which is the broadband hydrophone, is served by OOI on their raw data archive. And the hydrophone, low-frequency hydrophone data and seismic data is served via the Incorporated Research Institutions for Seismology website. So the broadband hydrophones are located, 4 of the broadband hydrophones are located slope base and axial base. And there are a hydrophone each on the 200-meter platform, which is in the water column, and then they're paired with one on the seafloor at each of those 2 sites. So that accounts for 4 of our hydrophones. And there are 2 more hydrophones on the Oregon coast. And this is at the offshore site in 600 meters water depth on the seafloor, and one at the shelf site at 80 meters water depth. Now, that was accounting for the broadband hydrophones. We also, as I mentioned, have low-frequency hydrophones, and those are associated with broadband hydrophones, broadband seismometers. And one occurs at Southern Hydrate Ridge, and that was actually, as Dana mentioned, that's location of large amounts of methane emissions associated with hydrates, and that is all due to the interaction of the seafloor, the sediments, and the subduction zone of the Cascadia margin. There's also one at slope base that's associated with a broadband seismometer there. And then there's a couple of low-frequency hydrophone instruments at the AXIAL volcano. And there's one hydrophone at axial base at the 2,900 meters water depth on the seafloor. And then there's 2 in the caldera, and I think Dana already showed an image associated with the other, where those instruments are. Now, as Dana mentioned, the axial seamount is the most advanced submarine volcanic observatory in the ocean, and it's also the most magmatically active volcano off the Oregon-Washington coast. So we're very interested in monitoring the interactions, the reactions in the sediments, what happens in the caldera. As Dana said before, there's a couple of low-frequency hydrophones. The caldera is in a location where, with time, the magma chamber increases as due to before an eruption, and the seafloor in the caldera then rises up. And then after there's an eruption, the caldera seafloor drops because of the magma is then eluded to the sediment surface, to the seafloor surface. So the last time it erupted was in 2015. As you can see in this picture, and this is a bomb pressure tilt instrument that measures the seafloor depth essentially at very high resolution. And in 2015, April 24th, the seafloor dropped. Associated with that seafloor drop, there was also a temperature increase of the water at the seafloor. And the seafloor fell at 7.4 feet. And after that, it started inflating again. Now here, there's some work that was done in monitoring the earthquakes. As you can see, the blue dots are locations of earthquakes associated with that event, that seismic event. In the upper part of the left panel, you'll see red dots, and those are impulse events. And those are things that are measured by things such as the low-frequency hydrophones that are waterborne events, and that is interpreted as being as a result of either magma flowing onto the seafloor and expulsion of bubbles, of gas bubbles, explosion, imploding of things like pillow lavas and such. And those were all measured as by the low-frequency hydrophone. And I'm going to show you an example of that coming up right now. So this is the low-frequency hydrophone's data that was collected during that eruption in 2015, sped up by 5 times. And as this is interpreted as being that lava flowing onto the seafloor and being cooled by water and perhaps imploding or releasing gas bubbles. So not only can the low-frequency hydrophones be used for monitoring seismic events and waterborne events, things like the broadband data here also shows that there is synchronous with short-period seismometers, events such as the earthquake in Mexico in 2017. So I talked a little bit now about the seismic utility of hydrophones for monitoring seismic activity and in active plate margins and such. Now I'm going to switch over to a little bit more talking biology. And these slides here have been kindly provided to me by Liz Ferguson, who's the CEO of Ocean Science Analytics. And so I'm going to try to do her justice here and kind of try to explain. But if anyone has more detailed questions, I would direct you to her website. And I think she'd be happy to answer them. So her project is basically looking and evaluating and monitoring the changes of the ecological characteristics associated with the marine mammal occurrence within the California current ecosystem. And so she's interested in looking at the area that is covered by the regional cabled array, including the hydrophones at off the Newport, Oregon coast and 580 meters and 80 meters. And so basically what she's doing is looking at a cross-platform study combining looking at physical oceanographic variables, passive acoustic measurements of marine mammals, and other remotely sensed data in order to establish a long-term monitoring of the OOI coastal endurance cable array. So most of the stuff that she's doing is looking at data sets of the observations of mammals in the California current ecosystem off the Oregon coast. The problem with this stuff is that there are no acoustical observations of mammals in the area of interest. And what data there is available is spread out over decades. So there's a paucity of data for mammal observations or sightings in the area of interest off the Oregon coast. So she's been looking at a couple of species, including the humpback whale and the northern right whale dolphin and the sperm whale. And so by looking at the data over the last few decades, she was able to find 65 observations of the northern right whale dolphin. And interestingly though, and most of those occur in the fall because for one thing, it is influenced by the fact that they also migrate, but also that summer and fall is the time when most people go out there. Going in the Pacific Northwest in the coastal region there during spring and summer and winter is very difficult because of the stormy conditions and weather conditions, and so you don't get as many sighting observations during that time. The interesting thing is that if you look at different brackets, time brackets, you see changes in the sightings and observations of the whales. But there have been no observations since 2008 of the northern right whale dolphin in that area. So there has to be some other way of looking at it because of the fact that sightings isn't sufficient to interpret regarding the ecosystem changes and such. Liz is also looking at the sperm whale. And similarly, there are observations, a total of 50 observations since 1989 through 2008. But once again, most of them are in spring, some in spring, summer and fall, none in winter. We don't think that has to do with the lack of occurrence, but it's more in terms of lack of capability of observing during that time because of the weather conditions. And once again, there are no observations of the sperm whale since 2008. So one of the ways is to actually use passive acoustics, and that's what Liz has been doing. Has been starting to use passive acoustics data provided by the hydrophones on the regional cabled array, such as for the northern right whale dolphin, and also the sperm whale. And this affords her the ability to either augment the visual observation sightings that may happen in the future, or even replace those. This data is continuously streaming. The broadband hydrophone data is continuously streaming and available to anybody at any time. And so Liz is going to try to start looking at more and more of that data to augment and or replace the visual observations of sightings of the whales. So future projects for her are looking at ocean health monitoring, and then looking at more acoustic analysis of biodiversity in marine mammals, and then finally looking at the anthropogenic noise impacts and acoustic behavioral responses, which arrays of broadband hydrophones should be able to really augment her data sets. If you need any more additional information, I urge you to contact Liz at her website, and she can probably do a much better justice for this topic than I can ever imagine. So now I want to quickly go through a little bit of data access. Rather than trying to obtain the data live, I'm going to kind of just show you some snapshots on some pages, and that should be able to give you an idea of how to access the broadband hydrophone data. First of all of OOI data is free. It's open access to all, and it's all available via internet. There's no charge to it. All we ask is that you attribute the data source to the Ocean Observatory's initiative. So if you click on the oceanobservatories.org, you'll get a website like this, and you can dive in through a lot of things here. And there's a lot of selection of how the instrumentation, how it got there, where it is and such, but there's lots of levels here, and this may not be the best way to get to the, let's say, for example, the broadband hydrophone. So the broadband hydrophone data is on a specific component of this website, and that's a OOI raw data archive. And as I said before, the low frequency hydrophone data is at the IRIS site, and that's combined with the actual seismic data from the seismometers. Now you can dig through here and get to the raw data archive, and then look through that and find the data, but it's not the easiest way to do it. So I'm going to kind of show you a quick way to go directly to the raw data archive where the broadband hydrophone data is. And the best way to do this is if you go to the website, the oceanobservatories.org, and select Data Portal, it'll go to this page here, which is basically the data portal for all of OOI data. And you can look at other data through here also, but I'm just going to kind of show you how to get to the hydrophone data. If you see this little block for data catalog search, you enter appropriate keywords such as the hydrophone or a specific instrument like HYD-BB105, which signifies a specific location. And once you do that, you will obtain this page here. And this page will list all of the hydrophones. Since I use the term hydrophone, it'll list all the hydrophones. Each of these little boxes with an arrow in it will, for either one of those that you want to access, if you click on that, they'll take you directly to the raw data archive. And essentially, this is a nested folder structure. So each one of those is a 2015, 16, 17, 18, 19, and 20 data for that specific hydrophone. If you click on 2017 and you drill down, you'll get by month, then you get by day. And then once you get to the by day, I selected July 8th, 2017. And you can see a number of files. And these are mseed files, mini seed files. And this is actually a kind of an envelope around a WAV file. And this is for compression. And there's ways on the website that explains how to actually decompress that mseed file to access data. Each one of those files is 5 minutes in length, 30 megabytes. And right now we're doing the mseed file, but the future plans are to also provide this data in other smaller formats, easier to visualize, and also more compressed formats that people are more used to, such as FLAC. I also want to say that if you do go back, let me go back here a little bit. If you click on the documentation location here, you'll go back to the raw data archive. And in there, if you dig down a little bit, you'll get to a point where you see Jupyter Python, Jupyter notebooks. And if you select the broadband hydrophone Python module, it'll give you a opportunity to, it'll show you examples of code that you can use to get translate the mseed format into usable format and create spectrograms of the hydrophone data. So I'm going to, at this time, I'm going to pass you on to Mike Harrington. He is a senior principal engineer at the Applied Physics Lab. He has been involved with the program from from the very beginning, even before I did. He's been critical for the build out, the design and build out of the regional cable array. He is also the head and director of the electronic and photonics system at University of Washington, APL. Take it on, Mike.
Great. Thanks, Horst. Appreciate it. Thanks, everybody, for joining today. I'm just going to talk a little bit, give a demo of some of the data we've collected and talk about an application we developed, an internal tool we created to quickly access the data. We've got, from the engineering standpoint, we've got all this data coming at us, and we need to make sure that we can screen it quickly and make sure that the quality is good and that we're capturing, and there's a few data gaps. And so with the hydrophone data, that's a challenge, as Oris was just saying, the size of the files, the types of the files. And so we created an app that every day goes through, pre-creates or pre-computes spectrographs at various resolutions, stores them on a web server, and then we just keep those all pre-computed there. And then we have a simple web client on the that you download, and it will pull those images in, and it does some nice stuff about pre-caching images. So if you're looking at a certain time, it looks ahead and knows you're going to look to the left or the right and pulls those in. So then you can essentially play them as if it's a movie or something, and you can quickly scan in time and then also zoom in and out. So you can look at a month's worth of data or 15 seconds worth of data and quickly sort of look in. If we see something that needs further screening, we can jump in and look at that stuff. So yeah, you can quickly get through this large volume of data in a couple of minutes to see what happened in the last day. So again, what we do is we go through once a day, generate images for each of the hydrophones. We've got one file for a month, and then and one for a day, and then 24 for an hour, and then at 15 seconds we have a whole bunch of spectrograms. So we just store those sort of as flat image files on the server, and then we've got a client that can go and ask for those images, and it puts them together to make it look like it's a movie. So I'm going to go ahead and try. Let's see how this goes. Crank up the volume a little bit. Anyways, okay, so this is the web page here, and we're looking at we're looking at a month's worth of data for the high frequency hydrophone at the 500 meter site. You can see we're centered in July, and then with this, I can just sort of zoom around and move through August. If there's something like we want to see what's going on here, then we can zoom up and start zooming in. So this is a day's worth of data. We can center in. Okay, we want to look at that. We could go down into an hour's worth of data, 5 minutes worth of data, and then okay, maybe let's zoom in a little bit more. Okay, so actually I got lucky there and found some interesting noises. We can sort of look around, and then when we want to play something, we can just go ahead and the play button. So hopefully everybody could hear that, but clearly some interesting stuff going on. You can quickly scan through to see how long that activity was in the area. One thing you'll notice is that you'll hear it clicking about once a second in those, and those are those lines here. Those are from most of it, because we have a lot of infrastructure, different type of infrastructure. Trying to get a full picture of what's going on in the ocean. We have co-located ADCPs in the area with most of the hydrophones. So you'll hear that clicking, and that's something that the infrastructure's noise making. And I've been listening to it so long, I don't even hear it anymore, but everybody usually asks what that noise is. So let's see. So that's an example of how you can use the application, quickly move around. I won't go through this one because we just did listen to it, but again, you can hear animals, making noises, which is interesting. Dana talked about the vertical mooring we have a hydrophone on the 200-meter platform here, and so that let's see. Oh, yeah. Anyway, so there's a winch profiler with a motor on a drum that moves that buoyant platform up and down. We have a camera on it, so you can see there's an example of that winch letting the cable out so that buoyant platform can go up, and then it'll go ahead and pull it back down. But we also have a hydrophone there, so we can listen to hear. This is, you can sort of see we're looking at 1 hour of data. This is one of those step profiles that Oris was talking about, where it'll pull it down and let it sit, collect some data, pull it down a little bit further through the 200 meters. But because we have a hydrophone there, we can sort of listen to that, what the motor sounds like, or what's going on there. And let me, so there you can hear the motor starting up and starting to pull down. You can even hear things creaking as the cable's being paid out or pulled in. And we can actually use these as engineering sensors to diagnose sometimes if there's problems with the winch or something. We can use the acoustics to figure out what's going on. We've also used it. Dana showed the picture of that J-box that got pulled over. Well, we were able to sort of listen to the hydrophones leading up to it, and we could hear the props from an approaching vessel of some sort, and then we could actually hear like chains and things as the thing got closer to it before it got knocked over. And so it does, it's used obviously for lots of science purposes, but we've been able to use them for engineering purposes as well, which has been pretty helpful to try and figure out what's going on with the infrastructure out there. Dana showed some pictures of the ROV. This is one Canadian Ropos ROV that used to install the infrastructure. Again, it's another week. This last summer we were out and we were able to listen to it when the ROV was down operating close to one of the hydrophones. And it does make a lot of noise as well. Let's see. So that's at the base of AXIAL, so 3,000 meters depth, and the ROV is quite close to the hydrophone there. And you can see it was operating in the area for probably like six or 8 hours, continuously sort of using it has quite a few motors and actuators and things making a lot of noise when it's in the area. And then let's see, I'll just show a couple more interesting other noises we haven't heard yet. Let's see. Ahead a bit. Okay, and that's So that was a clip from the base of Hydrate Ridge, so right at its slope base. So again, 3,000 meters depth, and it was a pretty quiet day, and we were able to pick up quite a few noises, and so it was sounds. It was interesting listening to all the seemingly interactions between the animals down there. All right, that's all I had.
Thank you so much for that. And what a fantastic overview of a cabled acoustic array and a large-scale ocean observatory. I know I have some questions for you. So if anybody else has a question for Dana, Mike, or Orest, you can leave it on our social media feeds. We have about 15 minutes left to answer some questions, and we will do our best to answer them live. We did have a question come through on YouTube, actually, from Gary. And Gary, I think this was directed probably to Dana, but you mentioned that it was 40 days every summer that's reserved for taking the equipment to the site. Gary wants to know why it can't be left continuously.
Yeah, so all equipment is left 24/7 all year long. So those are what we call our maintenance cruises, and so there's certain instrumentation that needs to be calibrated. There's limited lifespan on some of the equipment, and so we go out and spend that time every year swapping. So we basically have two versions of the profiler, that shallow winch profiler, and so we'll pull one out and put another one in its place. So very little downtime while we're doing that, and then it's back to running for the next year until we come back again to replace it.
Yeah, and Dana, I just like to add, I think one of the critical points is that we like to go in the summer because of the size of the equipment, the fact that we have to use an ROV. We're kind of limited in terms of the sea states that we can use, and we can't go in the spring and in the fall or winter because the too many storms, and we wouldn't get our work done.
So Gary, I hope that answers your question. I have a question for you. So you have, you mentioned 6 hydrophones deployed. What do you hear most commonly throughout your hydrophone data?
Boy, that's a very good question. Basically noises. There's probably a lot of, I don't listen to the thing. I'm not one of the researchers. What we're really doing is providing a resource for other scientists. We don't really do the research, and people like Liz, and there are other people who actually also are interested in that such. But there's a lot of interest in ocean noise right now, and I think that is probably a predominant component of what we hear on the hydrophones right now.
So Dana, at the beginning of your presentation, you showed that there were quite a few active nodes throughout the Americas. Is there one of these deployments that's more active than the others? And does that change through the various seasons? Does it matter if it's spring versus fall? Can you comment on that at all?
So in the global OOI, there's actually multiple institutions. And so at the University of Washington, we work specifically on the regional cabled array, RCA, portion of the OOI. And then we work, colleagues at Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute and Oregon State University cover the other arrays. So there's global moorings out on the East Coast and at Station Papa and the Erminger Sea. Woods Hole puts those in, and those are not cabled. So the RCA is the only cabled array of the OOI. And so I would say, as far as activity in terms of sensor activity, because we have power and real-time bandwidth, we crank everything up, right? So everything sampling basically is, at the highest rates that we can reasonably sample. Whereas the moored arrays are put out there with batteries and some ability to regenerate power on site. And so those are operational also full time. So those teams will go out and replace those moorings usually once every 6 months, is about what that battery life will give the mooring. And so those are, so the entire array is active all the time.
That actually leads really well into my next question, which is, if someone wanted to listen live, when is the hydrophone most active? When are they going to hear something something interesting? Like, is there a lot of migrating marine mammals or something that happens in the area, perhaps during a season, where someone can tune in and expect to hear something?
Mike, you want to handle that?
Well, sure. I guess it's I would say one thing when we're looking at our app, try and find a time when it's quiet. Either the noise or wind noise, the sea state's low, and that has your best chance of being able to just quickly find something to listen to. And I think usually in the winter is when I've been able to find stuff to listen to. And it's usually on like the shallower sites, the 80-meter site, the 500-meter site. Those are the ones where your best chance of finding something interesting to listen to is.
So, Mike, in the clips that you played, there was a lot of chatter. Can you speculate what was talking to your hydrophones during those clips?
Unfortunately, I'm an engineer. I don't know. Oris, you're a scientist. I'm assuming it's dolphins. I'm assuming it's dolphins is a lot of the high chatter, and then the last clip I played definitely was way I would imagine is whale activity for sure.
Yeah, and I think what Mike mentioned is, I didn't mention during my reply, the idea that when I talk about ocean noise, I mean, it's a lot of wave action, rain. You can listen to rain events on hydrophones. There's a lot of other stuff that actually masks the stuff if you're trying to monitor mammals and things. So that has to be filtered out, or you have to listen at the right time, just like Mike mentioned.
And lots of ship traffic. We get to hear lots of ship traffic.
Yeah, lots of ship traffic and such. Yeah. As a matter of fact, didn't we also use it to then we were able to listen to when our shallow profiler mooring was trawled. We were able to hear it on the hydrophones at that time. Yeah. And we could hear the engines revving up as they were trying to pull it up out.
Yeah. So that actually leads really well into the next question I have, which is, have you noticed, since you did mention vessel traffic, have you noticed a decrease in some of that masking and additional noise throughout the course of this pandemic with the reduction in vessel traffic in the area?
I know of someone that's looking into that. I don't know if they've got a definitive answer yet, but they definitely were using our system to look at just exactly that question.
I'd be really interested to see some of that when it's all compiled.
Sure. Yeah. Great.
We actually have another question here that just came in from YouTube. Emma wants to know how the frequency range was decided for OrcaNav, the y-axis of the spectrogram. Is it possible to zoom in on certain bands? Oh, sorry, Emma, I butchered your question a little bit there. But Mike, I think that's a question for you, perhaps.
Yeah, in that application, no, I chose it to be zoomed in on the lower frequency. I can't remember if it's like 2 kilohertz or something like that. So you could easily see some of the lower noises that were interesting for what I was looking for at the time. But I didn't add, but certainly that would be something that would be good. You could also do, instead of just zooming in time, you could zoom in frequency as well, and that would be a nice expansion of it. But for I haven't implemented that yet.
I think we have time for about 2 more questions. I'm going to pose this question to everybody. In the future, is there something that you would like to see in your acoustic and larger array platform? Is there something you want to add? Perhaps maybe including something like an AUV or a mobile component? And this can be as pie in the sky and optimistic as you want it to be. Dana, why don't I start with you?
Yeah, so I have a special affinity for resident robotics, and actually that's kind of another half of my job is looking at how to enable persistent robotics. And so one of the things that this cabled array does is it brings power to places that usually in the past have not had power. So most remote ocean monitoring that's sustained over long periods of time is done with battery powered instruments, and so they're always made to be low power and to store maybe however much data can be stored on board. And so one of the things that the cable array does is brings power and and bandwidth to places where we've never had it before. And so we've already seen some novel applications of things like multi-beam sonars that are being used to scan methane plumes or hydrothermal vent plumes. And so, yeah, definitely the next extension of that is to get mobile systems and AUVs that can swim around, detect things, and come back and report to the cable and recharge and get new missions without people having to be in vessels on the water with the vehicles.
Yeah, and I just throw in that the system was designed to be expandable. It was designed with a lot of extra capability, so we have quite a bit of extra bandwidth to, if we wanted to add more sensors, hydrophones, cameras, things like that, and power as well. So, we can power those motors that drive the shallow profiler, but there's quite a bit of excess power in the system to expand, to add things like Dana was talking about, recharging AUVs and things like that.
And I like to add that I think, which a request that has been passed on by interested parties, is that, we talk about the hydrophones. The hydrophones we have right now are quite spaced far apart, and for sighting, for understanding an ecosystem location, and for potentially replacing visual observations of mammals in the coastal zone, a closely spaced array of the broadband hydrophones that are like a couple of meters apart with multiple instruments, 4 or 5 or more instruments in that location would be able to, let's say the coastal location, would be able to tell us a lot. And maybe someone should propose to add that to the cable array. That's NSF is taking, and other organizations are taking proposals to add on to the cable array, and we would be happy to help.
Fantastic. So to wrap things up, Orest, you already mentioned, but can you please remind us where we can find like the listening library, as well as some of the data that people can access from the OOI? Oh, right. You're muted.
Still muted, Orest.
Better. Let's try that again.
Yeah, now you're back.
I guess the jumping in point would be this website, oceanobservatories.org, and then drill down there. This is a new website relative to the art, and where all the broadband hydrophone data is in the raw data archive component of that. We're still working on streamlining this. It was a big build, and it's all in here. If you go to that website and go through a data portal, as I said before, you can actually get to where you need to go. And if anyone has any questions, feel free to drop me a line. I can pass on to you, Rose, our email, our contacts, and we are happy to help people get to where they want to go.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for that. Those are all the questions that we have for now. Again, as Orest mentioned, if you wanted to contact Dana, Mike, or Orest, if there's a question that you didn't get to ask, I will share their contact details with you. And if you want to reach out to Ocean Sonics, you can send us a message or drop us a line on any of our social media channels. You can find the Ocean Observatory Initiative on Twitter at Ocean Observe, on Instagram as Ocean Observatories Initiative, and on Facebook as OOI.org. If you want to revisit this presentation, it will be available on Ocean Sonic's YouTube channel and our Facebook page, and I'll share the link through our various social media platforms. We'll be continuing our Array October event next week, when we are joined by Garrett Peterson of the Norwegian Lube Ocean Observatory. Thank you so much for joining us today, and hopefully we'll see you next Thursday at 2 p.m. Atlantic time for another in-depth session all about arrays.
Thank you, Rose.